There are so many handheld emulation devices on the market now, some of which are fairly powerful and able to play games up to the PS2, and others having unique form factors which make them appealing simply for having an interesting design. The thing is though, is that many of these handheld emulators lack the element of simplicity. Even if a device comes with an SD card preloaded with games, it might not have the exact things you want to play, and you might have a difficult time getting certain games to run in the first place. Well, attempting to solve this accessibility issue is none other than the Super Pocket, created by Hypermegatech and whose parent company happens to be Blaze Entertainment, who are the folks behind the Evercade line of consoles. This actually gives these devices a bit more credibility because of everything that Evercade have been doing with the retro gaming and indie gaming scenes, so let's take a look at the Super Pocket and see if it might be worth buying. First of all, I want to say a big thanks to Blaze Entertainment for sending us these Super Pocket units for review. They don't release publicly until November the 14th, so we've got hands-on with these pretty early. But what exactly is the Super Pocket, and why do I have two of them? Well, they're a line of handheld systems which each come with a selection of preloaded games. The first run of systems features two devices, a Taito device having 17 pre-installed games and a Capcom device with 12 pre-installed games. As well as featuring different game selections, they also look distinct too, with both versions having a different colour scheme, which not only makes it easy to differentiate them, but also adds in a collectible element. I can imagine that if they do more of these in the future, you could get a whole bunch of them and they would look awesome on display. It kinda reminds me of all of the different versions of the Game Boy Color. Other than that though, they're identical. The inputs are the same, the screen is the same, and all of the internals are the same too. It's just the outer shell and the pre-installed games which make them distinct from each other. So it's not like you're going to be in a situation where one is outright better than the other. Which of these two devices are better is entirely subjective. Are you more in the mood for a Taito game like Bubble Bobble, or are you more in the mood for a Capcom classic like Mega Man? The choice is yours. First impressions of the devices were actually really good. These are retailing for £50 in the UK and $60 in the US, and this initially made me assume that maybe the build quality wasn't going to be all that great, and maybe they'd cut corners and the screen would be poor or something. But I'm actually pretty surprised by the quality on offer here. In terms of the layout of the system, I'm a big fan. It's clearly inspired by the Game Boy, having a vertical orientation, a D-pad on the left, 4 action buttons on the right, start and select buttons on the bottom, and a menu button in the centre at the top. On the back of the device you've got your volume control on the top left, a cartridge slot on the very top which we'll get into later, and 4 shoulder buttons in the middle which your fingers will rest on while using it. Finally, on the very bottom we've got a headphone jack, the on-off switch, and a USB port for charging. It's all quite minimal and sleek looking, and because it's quite small, it's also easy to fit in your pocket and there's nothing sticking out to snag on anything. They're a little bit heavier than I expected too, which instantly makes them feel premium and sturdy in the hand. The buttons are all very high quality, with the action buttons having a soft clicky effect to them, and the start, select, menu, volume, shoulder and trigger buttons all having a slight bit more resistance to them, which is great for stopping them being pressed by accident. The main thing I was worried about was this slightly odd looking D-pad. It's similar to an Xbox 360 D-pad in the way that it's on a circular base, but unlike with the Xbox 360, it's not too loose and you won't accidentally hit other directions when you're just trying to move to the right. With the Super Pocket, the D-pad sort of feels like it subtly snaps into set positions to give you a greater degree of accuracy, and I ended up quite liking it. Would I prefer a Nintendo or PlayStation style D-pad? Probably, but what we've got here isn't bad by any means. The one slightly annoying thing with the design of this is the way that the shoulder and trigger buttons are in line rather than being stacked, which ends up making it feel a bit unnatural to press the L2 and R2 buttons. When you hold the device, your fingers will naturally be resting on the back buttons. Pressing L1 and R1 is fine because they're placed towards the middle of the device where your fingertips rest. L2 and R2 are on the outside though, and I feel like I instinctively try to use the joint of my finger to press these while keeping the tips of my fingers on L1 and R1 in order to maintain a good grip on the device, but this just ends up feeling a bit awkward to me. The thing is though, is that this hardly ever came up as an issue throughout all of my testing, and the reason for this is that hardly any of the games featured on these devices actually utilise the back buttons. The only game I came across that actually used them was Street Fighter 2, and even then it only used 2 of them. So this all begs the question, why are these additional inputs here in the first place? Well, the first answer is that these could be for future Super Pockets, which might feature games requiring additional inputs. But the second and more important reason for these back buttons existing is that unlike with other devices like this where you're limited to the pre-installed games, you can actually expand the games available on this device because it's compatible with Evercade cartridges. This is pretty incredible because it dramatically extends the amount of time you can spend playing with the device, but it also has several other massive bonuses too. First of all, unlike with downloading ROM files onto an alternative device, which is in a bit of a legal and moral grey area, you're accessing official versions of the games here and supporting the original publishers and developers of these titles. Secondly, you're actually getting a physical cartridge, which just feels so much more satisfying than downloading digital games. And the final positive of this is that you're buying cartridges which are compatible with the other Evercade systems. So if you ever decided to get the Evercade XP or Versus systems, you would already have a collection of games to dive into. Maybe you even already have some Evercade cartridges, and if you do, you've already got a massive game library to jump into with the Super Pocket. It's all well and good having this expandable game library as well as the ones that come pre-installed, but what is it actually like to play games on the Super Pocket? The Super Pocket has some really impressive elements. First off, the screen is incredible, especially considering the price of the device. The 2.8-inch IPS display has incredible viewing angles, and the colours of these games are extremely vibrant. The resolution is only 320 by 240, but because the screen is quite small and these games didn't have the highest resolutions to begin with, this doesn't really matter at all. Another surprising detail is that the sound quality is actually really good here. It's only a single speaker in the middle of the device, but you've got a good amount of audio clarity. It can go fairly loud and it always sounds very crisp, and it's not too tinny sounding either. Don't forget too that it also features that headphone jack if you want to get even more immersed into your game. As you would expect with an officially licensed product like this, the quality of the emulation on offer here is as close to perfection as you can get. I experienced a single problem where a game crashed on the title screen, but I was able to go to the menu, quit out and then restart, and it was back to working flawlessly. Obviously none of these games would be particularly demanding, so it's probably not pushing the hardware very much at all, but I'm still happy to see everything working smoothly and I've got no complaints in this area. As far as any extra features go, things are kept fairly minimal. You can access basic emulation options from a menu with things like save states and rudimentary display options like adding scan lines or swapping to pixel perfect or stretched video modes. And there's also an option to set all of the arcade games on the device to easy mode, which effectively is the equivalent of changing all of the arcade cabinet's dip switches to their easiest setting. And considering how hard some of these arcade games can be, this is actually a pretty welcome addition. The main UI keeps the trend of having everything be as simple as possible. It basically just consists of the games available on the system which you cycle through, with you pressing the menu button and selecting the Evercade option to access any games on the cartridge. It's easy and quick to navigate, and everything just works. I like it a lot. But come on now, there's gotta be something wrong with these devices, right? I've been singing the Super Pocket's praises for a while now, so let's get on to some negatives. Although I do think that the games on offer on both of the devices are pretty good, I do have to question certain inclusions. For example, on the Taito one, you've got Operation Wolf, a light gun game which is obviously supposed to be played with, well, a light gun. Why was this even included when it completely defeats the purpose of the game when you're just moving a cursor around on the screen? Then you've got games like Volified on the Taito device and 1942 on the Capcom device, which have a thinner vertical aspect ratio, and considering the screen is already pretty small, these games make the screen look even smaller, which isn't exactly ideal. You'd have thought that some of these games could have been swapped out for maybe some slightly newer games to demonstrate what these devices are capable of a bit more. I get that the focus of this particular run is on arcade games, but this almost seems like a shame to be limited in this way when there's so much more that could have been showcased. Something else which feels maybe a little bit strange is that a lot of these games feature a fairly heavy emphasis on multiplayer. Games like Bubble Bobble are way more fun in co-op, and Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting is known for its competitive multiplayer. But the Super Pocket has absolutely no multiplayer functionality at all. I was thinking that maybe it could connect wirelessly to other nearby devices, or maybe even have some sort of link cable, which would have been an awesome throwback to the Game Boy, but no. You just straight up can't do any form of multiplayer here, which just feels a little bit weird. There's also no online functionality either, which in a way is refreshing because you know you're getting a finished product that doesn't rely on updates to fix firmware problems or emulation issues. But in another way, this is a shame because it means that there's no online leaderboards or even trial versions of games to download or anything like that. This all brings me to this sort of weird conclusion. I really like the Super Pocket. I think the idea behind it is genuinely good, and I'm blown away by the quality of it considering its fairly low price tag. This is an absolutely amazing way of introducing somebody to retro gaming or retro emulation devices, and everything about it is just crafted so well, from its sleek design and its minimal UI. The main issue for me is that despite its functionality with Evercade cartridges being a massive strength when compared to other devices, it does cause this slight conundrum where it's inadvertently competing with the other Evercade systems. Considering that Evercade already have a portable console with the Evercade XP, and it's technically better than the Super Pocket in almost every way, featuring a higher resolution screen, HDMI output being widescreen, featuring a tape mode to play vertical games by turning the device sideways, and even having Wi-Fi functionality, it's difficult to justify buying a Super Pocket over an XP. The obvious advantage of the Super Pocket here is the difference in price. On Amazon, the XP is going for £130 in the UK and $130 in the US, which is more than twice as expensive as a Super Pocket. So I suppose they're sort of aimed at a different market purely based on that. You could theoretically get a Super Pocket as a Christmas present without breaking the bank too much, whereas the Evercade XP is probably a more major purchase. The Super Pocket's simplicity with its design and UI also make it more suited to complete novices to the retro scene, or maybe even kids looking to experience gaming history. So there definitely are situations where the Super Pocket has an advantage over the XP, but I would say that they're probably quite niche situations. I think this comparison to the other Evercade consoles is where the Super Pocket is gonna struggle, but there is a chance that they could market it cleverly to make it more attractive. For example, if there was an Evercade cartridge filled with Game Boy games, this would obviously be more suited to the Super Pocket than anything Evercade related, simply because of the Super Pocket's form factor. On the other hand though, any games on the Evercade that have a widescreen resolution might look weird on the Super Pocket due to its 4x3 screen, and I'm assuming these would be letterboxed, which again makes the screen appear even smaller than it is. And to be honest, this might even result in certain games being almost unplayable. So you'll really have to think about what you're wanting from a device like this and weigh up the positives and negatives yourself. It almost works better when you view it less as a competitor to the Evercade systems and more as a companion. Like if you already have an Evercade XP, I can almost see the Super Pocket being more attractive because it's smaller and more portable, and you'll already have loads of cartridges to use with it. You'd be able to decide which games are more suited to a smaller vertical device, and which require that bigger screen that the XP has. But those are my thoughts on the Super Pocket. It's an awesome little device, and I love that it's attempting to make handheld retro gaming a bit more accessible through the use of its minimal and intuitive UI, and of course its cartridge-based games. It's just probably positioned itself in a slightly difficult place in the market, and could have done with more varied pre-installed games to really showcase what it's capable of. It is hard to complain too much though when the quality is this high, and the price is so competitive too. This seriously would make for an amazing present for somebody who's into retro games, or maybe somebody that's brand new to the handheld scene. It's also a pretty good gateway into the wider line of Evercade systems. If you know somebody that might potentially be interested in that, but you don't want to commit to spending a whole lot of money on one of the actual Evercade consoles, you could opt to get this for them, see if they like it, and then maybe invest on one of the more expensive systems down the road. But let me know what you think. Do you like the look of the Super Pocket, and would you be interested in picking one up for yourself? Also, what do you think to the idea of getting one of these over one of the other Evercade systems? Do you think it would be worth it? And also, while you're there in the comments, you might as well give the video a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe to see more retro content coming very soon, and I've been Rob from Retro Dodo, and I'll see you in the next one.